Remember those who are in prison. That verse continues, that's from Hebrews, and that verse continues, as if you were there with them. And I've been kind of haunted by that verse ever since, I was looking for something appropriate to title this, and it's hard when you think about that. We don't really want to remember the conditions that are going on in our corrections system right now. You're going to hear that Alabama has, and has for many years running, has the most overcrowded prisons in the country. Thanks to some of the work that's been done, that's been reduced slightly, but we still have a terrible overcrowding problem. We spend less than most states on prisons. We're 42nd on prison spending on corrections among the U.S. states. And if you adjust that for spending per inmate, we're 46th in the United States in spending on corrections. We are 49th on spending in judicial state and local spending on judicial and legal system in the state. And I didn't realize that until I was kind of running the numbers. We continue to rank in the top 10 in the incarceration rates. So we lock up more people as a percentage of our population than most states. We're in the top 10 as far as that goes. And 8th highest. And yet at the same time, we don't seem to have achieved public safety through this approach. We are within the top 5 in homicides. We continue to be a place where there's a disproportionate amount of violence. And I, along with being a church member and on the Highland Avenue Forum Committee, I work for the Public Affairs Research Council of Alabama, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, good government think tank based on the Sanford campus. And we believe government should work and is an important part of our society, and that it needs to continuously improve and set goals, own your data, understand where you are, develop strategy, implement strategies for improvement, and when those are working, you celebrate your successes, and when they're not working, you correct course. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be in that kind of positive feedback loop in Alabama in corrections at this point, and we'd like to see that change. I'm so happy that so many of you came out today and indicate that you're interested in seeing that change. And hopefully today we will hear we'll leave with some inspiration and some further connections being made, so we can be part of a positive change that increases public safety and creates and improves humane conditions for those who are in prison. So our first panelists are a fellow church member, former Jefferson County Circuit Criminal Judge Teresa Pulliam, who is still judging, she's Judge Emeritus, and who's been very important in this work over the years, trying to understand and help shape sentencing in Alabama. Bennett Wright is the executive director of the Alabama Sentencing Commission, and he will tell you more about what the Sentencing Commission to do. And they're going to begin with a kind of an overview of how we've gotten to where we are, and the attempts at reform and what still needs to be done. So that sound about right? Y'all ready to go? All right, thanks very much, and we'll follow that with Alabama Appleseed is here. AL.com's Ivana, help me. Rinke, who is a journalist doing important work in this area, will follow them. So, without further ado.
Thank you, Tom. And good morning, everybody. It's especially a wonderful morning for me to be able to share my experiences and history of criminal justice in the state of Alabama with my church family and with other oldies but goodies in the community of ministry that I've been involved with for well over 20 years now. It's hard for me to publicly admit that this is my 40-plus year in the criminal justice system. That's very hard for me to say. Bennett and I have been working as colleagues for over 25 years now. Consider him to be one of my dearest friends. And Bennett and I routinely, almost every year, speak to Leadership Alabama and Leadership Birmingham on this very topic. And he will give you more of the numbers that we're talking about in the Department of Corrections. And I'm here really to give you sort of my perspective and an overview of the history of where we were and where we have been. And I hope to leave here not all gloom and doom, but to point out some high points that Alabama has accomplished over the years. The perspective that I have comes from being a very young DA, starting in the Mobile DA's office when Charlie Braddock was Attorney General, and the whole 3 strikes and you're out mentality was alive and well. And we were locking up people for very long periods of time under the law for burglaries and other nonviolent crime under the Alabama Habitual Felony Offender Act. I went to practice in the DA's office in Birmingham. I saw that slowly being shifting. Pratt came around during that time, and so things were really serious about locking up drug offenders back then. But at some point along the way, some very good leaders like Joyce Vance and Sue Bell Cobb and others in Montgomery started to say, wait a minute, our prisons are overcrowded. They're the worst in the country. We are spending less on prisoners than every other state in the country except for Mississippi, once again. So something's got to give. What are we going to do? And so a movement in the state of Alabama began about being smart on crime. Let's make sure that we are putting the right people in prison, the people that need to be in prison to help rehabilitate them and to protect the public. That was the impetus of it. And also we were looking at it from an economic standpoint. Where are we spending our money in prisons? Are we spending it on the people that we really need to be there? And are we spending money in the prisons so that when they get out, they are better people and can contribute to the society that we live in, get jobs, pay taxes, not reoffend? What are we really doing to help their situation while they're in prison, as opposed to letting them out of prison with a bus ticket and saying, good luck? That's not going to work. So a movement began a few years before 2015, and task force after task force was developed by the governors, by the chief justices, by the legislature. And Bennett and I served on basically all of those task force. I drove to Montgomery a lot on my own dime, and every time we had a meeting, I would vow I was never going to go back. And why am I doing this? But you know, there was that glimmer of hope that we were at the table. Everybody was at the table. The county commissioners, the legislators, Republicans, Democrats, law enforcement, DAs, victims groups. Every single person who's a part of the criminal justice system was at that table in Montgomery and continues to be at that table in Montgomery. And there's been a massive effort on behalf of those governors in those years and to the current time with Governor Ivey to have task force and to have discussions and to have those people at the table that make those decisions make the right decisions and move forward in this area. And I'm so proud in 2015, and it's the proudest moment I've ever had that anything our legislature has ever done, was that they passed the Justice Reinvestment Act. And I remember at the time, Joyce Vance was in Washington at a U.S. Attorney's Conference and said, Teresa, every single U.S. attorney in the country is talking about how progressive and smart Alabama's legislature has just acted in this sentencing reform. Now, this was an area of sentencing reform. It made uniform guidelines available to judges throughout the state so that their sentencing was more uniform, some mandatory, so that, and I'm not going to single out counties here, but that judges, perhaps in South Alabama, weren't sentencing somebody to 20 years on a marijuana case and not sentencing the same thing in Jefferson County. So not all judges like that act. I will tell you, I believe I was serving as president of the Circuit Judges Association shortly after that, and Bennett and I had a lot of very frank conversations with judges from all over the state about why this was a good and fair thing and would make their jobs really, in the long run, easier and protect the citizens of every county. So that act went into effect, and after that went into effect, and Bennett will get into the weeds here, but our statistics went down. We were working. Recidivism was down. The numbers in the prisons were down. We were seeing immediate results of our legislation. And also during that time, there was a push to begin education in the prisons. I'm very proud to say that you can get a degree from Auburn University. There are art classes that are being taught. Ingram State right now in the prisons is doing remarkable work in teaching trade to inmates so that they can get out and go to work at the automobile places and other welding and get their union cards and be making close to 3 figures of money. We have so many people committed in Birmingham. I always like to say Protective Life is right up there at the top, who started the trend. And I have a list of 4 pages of employers that I can give to somebody that comes in front of me. Don't know, Mr. Askey, where are you? When they say, oh, I can't find a job, Judge, I'm like, really? Here's a list of 4 different places that I gave you. How many of these did you go see? So there are employers that are open to hiring ex-felons now, and it's the single most important thing to prevent recidivism, especially amongst men. Men need to support their families, and the pride that they feel when they get a job and they come back and they say, I have a job, I have a paycheck, and I wanted you to see it. And it still brings chills to me. It's the greatest thing that can happen as a result of somebody being held accountable, going to prison, getting out, and then rectifying his bad ways and being a productive citizen and taking care of his family and getting a job. And that's really why we're here today, is to talk about how we can help accomplish that. We are here to show mercy to those who are in prison and who are one day going to be getting out. And how do we show mercy? We become mentors, we engage in ministry, and we do everything we can to get employment for those people that need jobs. They need homes to come to, they need jobs to come to, and they need the support of the community and the mercy from all of us. 2 important points I want all of us to remember this morning. I know the title is to remember those who are in prison. And believe me, I commit myself to that just about every day. But I think it's also important for all of us not to forget the victims of the crimes. Those people who are not with us, who have been murdered, and those victims who will be scarred forever as a result of the crimes committed against them. This year, we've had many in our church who have been victims of crime, serious crime. And it's important that we not ever forget that aspect of the criminal justice system. I just really wanted to say that because I think it's important. And also to remember, and again, Bennett is going to talk more about this, but for the most part, and I know I'm generalizing here, I'm not using numbers, but for the most part, because of all of the sentencing reform that we've done over these many years, the people who are now in the Department of Corrections, the majority of those people are there because they need to be there, because they are a danger to the community. They are the violent offenders. On the other hand, there are still a number of people who are in our prisons who make up that statistic who have not committed violent crime, who are nonviolent offenders, and a lot of them have gone back on revocations because they've gotten in trouble when they got out. But for the most part, judges can't send your first-time nonviolent offenders to prison because of the sentencing reforms that we've put into place. So those nonviolent offenders are really who we're talking about today. How do we get them on the way to get out? And what do we do with them? How can we help them and support them once they do get out? There are so many, as I said, so many new things in the Department of Corrections since I've been 40 years in that we do for people that are getting out that we didn't used to do. Driver's licenses are a tremendous impediment to getting a job, to going to your probation office. I mean, the list goes on and on. At judges' conferences, we've had Jeremy Shearer come from the U.S. Attorney's Office and do an exercise where all of the judges in the state of Alabama were given an ID of a defendant. You know, I'm Joe Blow, I have to go to my probation office, I have to be drug tested once a week, I need to report about how many jobs I've applied for this week, I have to pay alimony over here, I have to pay this over here. It was literally all I could do to go through it for 30 minutes. And I finally just said, Jeremy, I've had it, I am going to the bar. And it was like all the other judges were like, I can't believe we do this to people. So I think judges got a first-hand exercise in all of the impediments that judges can put in front of somebody who is just trying to do the right thing and get to where they need to be, and how impossible that is sometimes. So it is on the forefront of the judges in the state of Alabama's mind. All of the judges in the state of Alabama were also required to get on a bus with a box lunch and go to 2 prisons of their choosing. Not all judges wanted to do that, but they did. And so we got on the bus, I went to Tutwiler and I went to Elmore, and I've been to plenty of prisons before as a prosecutor, and so I knew what to expect. But leaders of our community and 30-year men on the bench literally had to go find a little corner to cry in. That's how bad it is. There are people, Bennett and I used to take tours to the Alabama prisons with the leaders of the state of Alabama and with Birmingham, and there were people who could not complete the tour of the prison. There were people who wouldn't get off the bus. It was so bad, or had to leave, be escorted out. Alabama prisons have no air conditioners in the summer. Let me repeat that. The Alabama prisons have no air conditioners in the summer. I mean, can you imagine that? So while all of these good things have been going on as to what we've accomplished in sentencing reform and in getting our numbers down and to helping people get out and help with their recidivism problems, the prisons themselves have just been going straight to hell. That's the only way I can describe it, just going straight to hell. Kitchens falling off, inmates going amok, not enough security. I can give you instance over instance where I got pictures of somebody I sent to a life sentence, one of the worst people I've ever had to sentence, with a gun in his hand and cash on his lap, and he escaped. Easily escaped. compromise coming over the fences at the prison. Cell phones are getting in. Guards are being compromised. Inmates are using families of inmates, okay, to secure money to kidnap, basically, their child in prison while they're there. And we don't have the sufficient guards that we need in the prisons. And we're not able as a state to offer the incentives to somebody who is interested in getting a job at the prisons. Bennett will talk more of that. But why in the world would you go to work at an Alabama prison when you can go to the sheriff's office or to a local jurisdiction and get far more benefits and have far less stress and misery? So there are a lot of different things that we certainly need to work on. But I think the most important thing that I want to take away from this is that we have people like you, and there are constantly people in Montgomery. Church groups are absolutely have stepped up on the plate throughout the state, especially in Jefferson County. I think it is so important right now for IPC to step up to the plate as a church. I beg you to do that as a church. I beg individuals that are here and that you might know to think about being a mentor to somebody who's been recently released. I'm very active with a program that the foundation is supporting, that all of those men haven't had father figures in their life. They have no mentors. They have no neighbors, coaches. The story is always the same. There's nobody in their corner. And for somebody, a grown man especially, to say, hey, let's go have lunch. Talk to me about what's going on in your life. I mean, adopt somebody that you can mentor to who has gotten out of jail. Because again, I'll go back to the employment and the support are the single greatest, and love, the single greatest aspects of making sure that that person who has served his time in prison is going to be supported and start making the right decisions and go down the right path and change their life around. And there is nothing better that you could ever see in your ministry and how you represent God and Jesus as making sure that you have a part in that. So, I look forward to answering any questions that y'all have at the end of the program. I want everybody else to have plenty of time to talk. I just want to say this about Bennett before he stands up. Bennett is one of my oldest friends, so I am very biased. But I will say this, Bennett is the greatest, and I don't use this word lightly, he is the greatest resource that the state of Alabama has in this area of discussion. He is on speed dial of every smart circuit judge in the state of Alabama. He is on every speed dial of every engaged, smart thinking Alabama legislator. He is on speed dial of everybody who's involved in the governor's office on this subject. He's on speed dial in Washington, D.C. and has testified in front of Congress. Every day that I speak to him, I just pray that he's not telling me that somebody, I know they're after him, I know they are, but he is so very, very important to what we are doing in this area and to making sure that everything is done right and by the numbers, by the book in Montgomery. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Bennett Wright, who is the director of the Alabama Sentencing Commission.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Obviously, you can tell by my accent I'm not from Alabama. I tell every time I speak with Judge, I always tell the audience I'm probably the least likely person to be in this position. I'm not from Alabama. I'm originally from Montana, and I'm also not an attorney. I just tell everyone, like the Holiday Inn commercial, I just played one on TV. So one of the things that I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of how Alabama landed in the situation, right? And I think it's interesting. We're talking about, we'll go over the last 50 years of really history. And one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about, the state of Alabama is currently engaged in multiple pieces of federal litigation against the state of Alabama's prison system on really a variety of fronts. And a lot of the statements I hear about that, a lot of the questions I get, I think people have forgot very recent history. One thing I will tell you is that Alabama has the most complex criminal justice system known to man. I served as president of the National Association of Sentencing Commissions. I served as vice president. I worked at the administrative office in Washington, D.C. for the federal judges. Alabama's system, if it was an a la carte menu of criminal justice options, Alabama has everything on the menu, okay? I'm briefly gonna go through the options. It's kind of mind-numbing, right? We have death sentences. We have life without parole sentences. We have life sentences. We have determinate number of years sentences. We have split sentences. We have sentences that are eligible for good time. We have sentences that aren't eligible for good time. We have 4 classifications of good time. Some people are eligible for 4 classes. Some people are only eligible for 3. You can also get that revoked. We have the parole system. There's 3 different buckets of the parole system depending on what type of determinate year sentence that you have. We have prisons. We have maximum security, medium security, minimum security. We have work release. We have work centers. We have work camps. We have county jails. We have municipal jails. And we have community corrections. We have drug courts, mental health courts, veterans courts, gun courts, family courts. In some places, it depends on what jurisdiction that you're in. Okay, we have everything known to man is slapped up on the wall. Okay, I also want to just make a point, and it's tough to kind of let it sink in. So in my role, there's 143 judges in the state that have the authority to sentence people to prison. Okay, so we have 143 judges. There's 42 different DA's offices. Okay, we have 140 legislators. You have a governor, you have a lieutenant governor, and you have a county commission in every county in the state. Okay, good luck getting all those people on the same page at the same time on the same issue. Right? And that's part of the historic reason in Alabama why we've kind of gone through all these different changes in actually philosophy. One of the things also with sentencing that I didn't mention, we also have Habitual Offender Act. We have presumptive guidelines. We have voluntary guidelines. We have some cases that don't have any guidelines at all. We have gun enhancements. We have drug sale enhancements. We have a variety of enhancements based on what type of offenses that in fact we have too. Okay, it is a very complicated system. What I want to start with is probably the thing is I always hear people say now, well, we're in federal court, we surely won't do X. Okay. Well, let's talk about what happened the last time Alabama was in full-fledged federal litigation. Alabama was the first state in the country that had its prison system sued in federal court. In 1975, the state of Alabama was sued over prison conditions and the ability of the state to provide medical and mental health care in 1975. At that time, it was the infamous Judge Frank Johnson was the trial court judge. Okay, so we're sued in 1975. Guess what happens in 1977? The state passes the Habitual Offender Act. Okay, so right in the midst of Alabama being sued, the state's reaction is to pass the Habitual Offender Act. Okay, at that time, though, in 1977, Habitual Offender Act, Judge, I just learned this because I had to pull the old legislative act. It was discretionary. In 1975, Alabama's first habitual offender added 5 years onto a sentence, but it was discretionary. Okay, so federal litigation ramps up. Guess what the state does in 1979? They make it mandatory. Okay, and that was the birth of the modern day Habitual Offender Act, was at the height of the federal litigation involving our prison system. Okay, so I always hear people say, well, we surely won't do X, we're in federal court. We did it the first time. We passed the thing that single-handedly increased sentences more than anything Alabama's ever seen in the midst of the last time we're in federal litigation. So I think it's naive for people to say we surely won't do this just simply because we're in federal court. So what I have up on the slide right here, so Alabama went into the federal case in 1975 and emerged in 1988. Okay, so the first piece of litigation took almost 14 years. And one thing that I think people need to be cognizant of too, you know, a case doesn't get filed Monday and it doesn't get settled Tuesday, right? These pieces of litigation drag out decades, long periods of time. So you see what happened. Alabama doubled its prison population the last time we were in federal court. Okay? Alabama's not like unlike a lot of other states. There are a lot of other states around the country that had increased populations too, but Alabama's increased at a much higher pace. Then in the next decade, after that, in the 1990s, Alabama's prison population increased even more. Okay? So in the 1980s, from 1980 to 2000, Alabama's prison population almost quadrupled. Okay? That is explosive growth. It almost quadrupled. It went from 6,000 in 1981 to about 22,500 by the year 2000. Okay? That's pretty explosive growth in a prison population. Okay? So then, what happened in the next decade? Okay? This was Alabama's kind of first venture into, quote, reform. Okay? So what happened in 2003, okay, and I'm not saying this to be snarky, but a lot of the same concepts that are being discussed now were solutions that were proposed over 20 years ago. In 2003, the Alabama legislature passed a bill that created a second parole board. Okay, so in 2003, the Alabama legislature passed a bill that passed a second parole board, but that parole board had a sunset provision on it. Okay, what the sunset provision means, it automatically goes away after a certain amount of time. Okay, the main fault that Alabama did when they passed that law in 2003 was they didn't fund anything. All they did was they impaneled the second board that said you have extra hearings, but they didn't invest any extra money into any sort of rehabilitation efforts. They didn't invest in anything in the community. There was no extra money for education, vocational training, substance abuse, mental health, nothing. All it was a board that paroled people, that paroled them to no help. Okay? So then that board went away, and in 2006, that's when the first set of sentencing guidelines became voluntary. Okay? And I tell a little joke on myself, you can see how successful that was. Right? So in 2006, that was the first time in Alabama's history that judges like Judge Pulliam had the option about whether or not to use habitual offender or not. Prior to 2006, if someone came before Judge Pulliam, she had no choice. If Bennett had a prior felony, she had to sentence me pursuant to the Habitual Offender Act. Circuit court judges had no choice. That was the law of the land. It was mandatory. 2006, it became voluntary. What happened in these next two pieces, as Judge Pulliam mentioned, in 2016, we had justice reinvestment. 2013 were presumptive sentencing guidelines. And that was the effect on the prison population in Alabama from 2013 to actually 2018. The prison population dropped by 6,000 individuals. Okay? That's not the end of the story though, okay? And we're going to get into, Alabama tends to always be on different philosophical tracks over different periods of time for a variety of reasons. Okay? So let's go back and remember that. There's 143 judges in the state that have the ability to sentence felons. Okay? You know, rhetorical question, do you think all 143 have the same judicial philosophy? Probably not. Do you think all 42 district attorneys in the state have the same prosecutorial philosophy? Probably not. Do you think all 140 legislators that have the ability to pass laws that mandate what judges and DAs can do you think they're on the same track? No. And then we also have a 3-person parole board that has the ability to determine when people with determinate sentences get out of prison. Okay? The 3-member parole board, okay, is a pretty interesting piece in government. Not all states have parole boards, but in states that do have parole boards, there's really no such thing as a training track in life to becoming a parole board member, right? You don't graduate from college with a degree in parole, right? People come to the parole board from a variety of different backgrounds. And until 2019, there was no real qualifications for anyone to get on the parole board, okay? I'm not saying that's good or that's bad, but if you look at the history of who's been on the parole board in the state of Alabama, it covers the spectrum of life experiences. Anywhere from cosmetologists to former law enforcement officials, lawyers, people with experience in the criminal justice system, people with no experience in the criminal justice system. But that 3-member board has the ability to decide whether someone gets out of prison after 15 years or never gets released from prison at all. Okay? That's a lot of authority to vest in 3 people. And you can imagine with 3 people, you change one person, that can change the whole dynamic of how a parole board operates. Okay? So we spent a lot of time from the outside looking at what prosecutors do, what judges do, but historically there hasn't been a lot of interest paid into how do 3 people that sit as the release valve from a prison system work. What factors do they consider? What factors do they not consider? Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of that. But then the next piece in Alabama's history was in 2018, a gentleman by the name of Jimmy O'Neill Spencer was released from prison and committed a triple homicide in Marshall County. Okay, in the wake of that, Governor Ivey issued a moratorium on all parole hearings. So what that means is for months in the state of Alabama, no one came up for a parole hearing. And the next legislative session in 2019, there was a revamp to the entire parole system. Okay, so you see there was immediate reaction. Obviously we had the COVID pandemic. Okay, so why did the prison population go down during COVID? Paroling practices did not change. The only reason the population went down is the prison system wouldn't let anyone into the prison system. Okay, so no one was allowed in, right? So if Judge Pulliam sentenced Bennett here in Jefferson County, Bennett stayed in the Jefferson County jail. Bennett did not go into the prison system. After COVID, that's when the numbers started to go back up. So just graphically, I just want to show you graphically, this is what the last 30 years of Alabama's prison population looks like. The state has never been in a place of prolonged stability with the prison population. Okay, why? The legislature will either change the laws that dictate who can go to prison or for the sentence length, or we change the composition of the parole board, and the parole board independently can either keep people in prison longer or keep people in prison shorter. So we have a system in essence, one side can go up, the other side can go down. They both can go up, they both can go down, they both can stay in the middle. But we have a system where if you just change sentencing, that doesn't change the population. We also have a system, if you change the parole board, that doesn't, in essence, change the system either if you don't change sentencing too. So you have all these dynamics that are competing dynamics that result with what you see on the graph. So when people say the answer is just X, I can rest assured the answer is just not X. It's more complicated than that. Okay? So I say this is kind of counterintuitive. You can lower sentences in Alabama and increase the prison population. Okay, that seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Okay. On the parole board, if Judge Pulliam sentenced Bennett to a life sentence on a robbery, I can be paroled after 10 years. Okay. But if Judge Pulliam gave Bennett a 20-year sentence on the robbery, and the parole board decided to keep me for 19 years, I actually served longer on the 20-year sentence than I did on the life sentence. Okay. So that's why when people say, well, the answer is just sentencing, that doesn't necessarily cut it, right? It has to be multifaceted, and that's why the solutions in this arena are very complicated. They're not just, you gotta fix this or you gotta fix that. It requires a lot of people to sit down and think about the system on a much larger level. So this is kind of the slide that I'm going to actually close with here, okay? And this is, in a nutshell, talks about the dysfunction we have as a state with reaching some point of actually stability. Okay? We can complicate it all we want, but there's only 2 factors that determine the size of a prison population. It's how many people go to prison and how long do they stay. Those are the only 2 factors. Right? But as you can imagine, and we'll just do a kind of a little exercise and kind of art and really our head right here. I want to show you how complicated that in fact this can get. Okay, so who goes to prison? Okay, I can imagine if I could see your thought bubbles, we'd have a little bit difference of opinion about who should go to prison, who shouldn't go to prison. Okay, most people are united. Someone outright just cold-blooded murders someone, they should go to prison. Right, everyone's pretty much united on that. Okay. What happens if someone burglarizes someone's outdoor shed, right? Some people are like, maybe not. What if they've done it for the 15th time? Right? What if the person has a prior armed bank robbery? Okay. You get in all these complicated situations, okay? And I'm just going to show the last part. How long do people serve in prison? Okay? That's the more complicated issue. The minute that Judge Pulliam hands down the life sentence to me, Judge Pulliam's out of the equation. She has no more say-so in how long I serve in prison. She loses, in the legal world we call jurisdiction. Okay, it's then turned over to the parole board. Okay, so the court loses all jurisdiction over how long that person serves in prison. And that, I think, is where as a state we disagree more so on who goes to prison, but how long does someone serve in prison? Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say on the way back to Montgomery today, I decide to stop at the Purple Onion down here, the restaurant on the corner. I pull out a gun, I walk up to the person at the counter, mash the gun inside of the person's head and said, if you don't give me all the money, I'm going to kill you right now. Okay? So first question, should I go to prison?
Yeah.
I think most of us are agreed on that one, right? Okay. The second question where we start to disagree is, what should my sentence be? If I come before Judge Pulliam, what should my sentence be? All right? And I just want you to think about that, right? I think that's where we start to disagree. I think if we took a random poll right here, the answers would be all over the place. We'd probably have a wide spectrum of answers, okay? But what if I told you I did it and I was bipolar and I just didn't take my medicine this morning? Would that make a difference to you? Okay? Would it matter to you if I was drunk or high? Would it matter to you if I had 8 prior robbery convictions? Okay? So we get into all these factors, right? But that's not the end of the story, right? Because the same factor that may be a big deal to Carla may not be a big deal for a factor to Tom. Right? So that's when we start to disagree about, well, people say, well, I think all that matters. Well, how much does it matter? Does it matter your prior was 2 years ago? Does it matter your prior was 20 years ago? Right? Well, I'm addicted to a substance. Well, how addicted are you? Were you, did you use it? So we get into all this difference of opinions on that, but let's say we're united, we agree on a sentence of Bennett for 40 years. Judge Pulliam sentenced Bennett to 40 years to the prison system. Okay. So the way the parole law works, I'd be eligible for parole in roughly 13 years. Okay, so the 40-year sentence, I'm eligible for actually parole. Okay, and this is the question that as a state, I think that there's no clear articulated reason, and everyone disagrees on this. How long should Bennett serve? And what are the factors that the parole board should use to consider how much of that 40-year sentence should Bennett serve? Okay? I speak to a lot of civic clubs around the state. Okay? I typically do 50 to 60 Rotary Club, Kiwanis clubs, Lions clubs, presentations. Okay? Smallest counties in the state, largest counties in the state. I can tell you there's a large segment of the citizens of Alabama that say Bennett should do every day of that 40 years. His sentence is based on what he did. The minute he pulled out that gun and held it up to that person's head, Bennett needs to be punished for that. Right? In the sentence that Judge Pulliam handed down, that sentence that time served needs to be reflective of that. There's another segment of citizens in Alabama that say, but I want to know what Bennett does while he's in prison. Does Bennett reform himself? Does he take advantage of opportunities? Does he behave himself? If Bennett doesn't have a GED, does he take advantage of getting a GED? If I was addicted to drugs, if I complete a drug treatment class, do I get credit for that? Should I get credit for that? What happens if I have a college degree and while I'm there I mentor other individuals that come into the prison system and I help them reform their lives? Should I get credit for that? So what exactly should we base the amount of time people serve in prison on? And that, I think, is where the state struggles with the most right now, is agreeing upon what should determine how long someone serves in prison. Is it just the offense in which they committed, or is it and I'm going to get back to I'm great at these questions. I was a teacher, so I love asking questions that I can't answer, right? So if we were to say, well, someone said, well, I think we need to, all that needs to be taken into account, right? Well, what does that mean? Does that mean 10% of it should be based on that? Does that mean 50% of that should be based on my conduct? Does that mean 75% of it should be based on my conduct? What happens if I get a major disciplinary? Does that erase all my good deeds I've done? I've been good in prison for 10 years, but then all of a sudden I get a major disciplinary because I had a bad day and I just beat the you-know-what out of someone in the cell. Should that erase all the 10 years of previous good work I did there? Should that eliminate me from parole consideration because I had one bad day after being in there 13 years? Okay. So those are the things, once you peel it back, that I think that the state really struggles with. Once Judge Pulliam sentences me, it's out of Judge Pulliam's hands. Okay. Outside of a split sentence, which we're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But once Judge Pulliam loses the actual jurisdiction, it gets turned over to a 3-member parole board, and they get complete unfettered discretion about whether or not to release that individual from the prison system. Okay? So the system itself is much more complicated than really a lot of people would like it to be. But I just want to remind everyone, we've always been on this trail. We either changed the laws or we changed how we parole people. Change the laws, change how we parole people. And we've rarely ever been stable ever since statehood in Alabama, really. All right. So thank you, and I'm gonna, I'll sit down and be quiet, and then at the end, like Judge Pulliam said, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Before we get into your portion, I think it's important and I've neglected to start with this, but I'm in church and I'm not so interested in the shock value because it is shocking. But before Carla with Appleseed and others stand up and talk about the reality of the situation right now, this is the reality of our prison system. And I'm reading from United States of America versus State of Alabama and Alabama Department of Corrections. The United States of America brings this action against the state of Alabama pursuant to the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act to enforce the 8th and 14th Amendment rights of men housed in Alabama state prisons. That would be the right against cruel and unusual punishment. The state of Alabama violates the 8th and 14th Amendment rights of these prisoners by failing to prevent prisoner-on-prisoner violence and sexual abuse, by failing to protect prisoners from the use of excessive force by security staff, and by failing to provide safe conditions of confinement in violation of the Constitution. Signed by Bill Barr, Attorney General of the United States. An amended complaint has also been filed by Merrick Garland. That lawsuit is pending right now against the state of Alabama. So we are in a world of hurt and at a very a threatening situation right now. And so Carla and Appleseed's work and so other many organizations is so important right now in getting the public's attention, in getting something accomplished, because the reality of the situation is that Alabama doesn't do anything to correct these problems. A federal judge will be releasing prisoners from the Alabama Department of Corrections without any guidelines whatsoever, like happened in the state of California. Okay? Nothing will go into looking at who those people are. Are they dangerous? Are they not? Do they deserve it? Do they not? They will be released en masse. So, with that, thank you for your time.
When I was sentenced to life without parole, I didn't comprehend life without parole. It didn't really hit me to about 10 years that, damn, I'm gonna die here.
I've always been too stupid to be scared, and that's been my problem. I was too stupid to be scared.
There's a lot of shot houses around. It was a lot of gambling and shooting and stuff like that. That's the normal environment in these communities. And so as a kid, my father wasn't around. I didn't really know the guy. My mother was an alcoholic. And so that gave me free reign to just do what I want.
And I got caught up with the drugs. But that's where the trouble really started, because I didn't know it, but I got addicted.
When I went to the county jail, they give you this court opponent lawyer, and he told me, he say, Joe, they're thinking about trying you as a habitual offender.
That's how I ended up getting life without for real, that 3-strike law.
between 250 to 300 guys still remaining in the Alabama prison system was sentenced to life without parole and hadn't even hurt anybody, hadn't touched anybody. They may have burglary crimes, they went to robbery, hadn't touched nobody, but yet they were given a sentence that this slow, agonizing death.
Yeah, they got everything on. I tell you what, when I first got the sentence that I got, life without parole, and I guess the first year or two, I really had lost hope, because the judge told me, he said, man, I'm gonna sentence you to life without parole. You'll never get out again. And the way the system is now, man, they struggling just to feed, clothe, and shelter me.
Okay. I saw these letters that the guys was getting, and I noticed that I met all the requirements they was asking about. And I said to myself, man, I fit that. I fit those requirements. So I said, I'm gonna write them. This is that opposite, that same opposite, and they're on this project of helping guys like us. So I wrote them, and sure enough, they started corresponding with me, and I sent them everything they asked for. So they took up my case. But when I first heard of them, it was really just gave fuel to my hope. I said, this is it. This was a great light of hope, concerning hope that I already had, that one day, somehow, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I'm getting out of here.
They was trying to reach me to tell me that the DA had signed it, and but they couldn't reach me, couldn't contact me. I had someone else to tell me, call, that you need to call your lawyer, and so they told me I might be getting out.
When that letter came and said that the judge had signed off on my petition, and I got the letter, I'm like, wow, man, I was beyond words to get that letter, because from that point on, I knew it was done.
I seen Ron McKeithen. He come to the door, and they rolled the gate, and he gave him the clothes, looked me and put on khaki outfit, big pocket shirt, and I went and changed, put the clothes on, got my little brown bag, my leave working. I said, man, come on. I go where they roll the gate. I stepped out, and I would say, hey man, say, what you want to eat? So I said, I want me a porterhouse steak, baked potato, and a salad.
When I went out the doors, man, and the reality set in that I'm really free. I mean, I'm out of here. So all I can do is just raise my hands up. All I can do is just raise my hands up and thank God for Appleseed.
That was a good moment right there. But then, even when I went to the hallway, standing out there, I still didn't believe until I was going down that road, you know. And so, I mean, just that first day of stuff, me just getting familiar with these people around me and how they are and how friendly and how loving, and it's like, man, I like this, I want to be around these people. Because I ain't really had no family here, no brothers. They became like family, you know. I like family. Carla realized that she needed someone that could understand and communicate with these guys, someone that done been and went through what they went through. And it made them feel even more secure of coming out to Appleseed because, okay, somebody there that I know. And when they get there, and I just let them know that we got you. I believe that second chances are so important because everybody deserves a second chance. We all have made mistakes. I look at it like we've all sinned. There's no big sin or little sin, but there always supposed to be room for forgiveness and redemption.
Being a knucklehead that I was, having given a second chance, there's a way more success stories. And you can't go wrong looking at how has this guy been conducting himself inside the walls to prove that he would make it out here.
There's something in there. Like I say, they done changed. I feel like they deserve a second chance. If they know what's going on and they do get out and did that kind of time under the circumstances that you have to live under and made it out, you couldn't go back.
I spent 37 years behind those walls, and I'm just one person with one story. But there are so many more stories out there, and you won't hear them if you don't give them a second chance.
Tom and everyone. He's one of the reasons I got into this trouble. We've known each other for a long, long time. So, thank y'all so much for hosting us and for your attention. I'm Carla Crowder. I work at Alabama Appleseed. And what I've learned in the many years I've been involved in criminal justice as a reporter with Tom at the News and at EJI and now at Appleseed is that the system that we've all been talking about is good at locking up a lot of people for a lot of different sentences, for a lot of different ways. But that's not the same as creating public safety, and it's not the same as determining risk. So the length of your sentence or even the crime of conviction doesn't necessarily tell us about your risk, how safe you are to return to the community. And that's why we started looking at cases of people serving life without parole, in the case of our work, for crimes with no physical injury, people sentenced under that 1978 Habitual Felony Offender Act. And what we've learned is that just because the state of Alabama determined in 1982 or 1999 that you are not fit to live in free society doesn't mean the state was right at that time. We've learned a lot since then. And so I would just like to point out that there are people sitting with us who were in handcuffs and leg irons as recently as 4 days ago. There are people sitting with us who were thrown away in prison for sentences of life without parole who are joining us today. Can I just ask you all to stand? Mr. Cheech, you don't have to stand. And these gentlemen range in age from, let's see, who's our baby? I think Joe at 50, oh no, there's our baby, Jack, yeah. 51. Are you 52 now? And then Mr. Coleman is 90. We just had a big shindig for his 90th birthday. So what I hope we'll explore later is why is it that so many elderly people who are of no risk are still in our prisons despite these amazing reforms that Bennett and Judge Pulliam have been part of. That's where we think we need to see movement, because for the incredible progress they've talked about, none of these laws were retroactive. So all the mistakes of the 80s and 90s are accumulating and creating a lot of the problems that we see now. So I will turn it over to Ivana, and I guess she'll let everybody introduce themselves. Are you going to stand here? Would you rather be at the podium or a table?
I will go wherever I need to go. I can stand here, that's fine.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, my name is Ivana Greenque. I'm an investigative reporter with AL.com, which is also Birmingham News, Huntsville Times, and Mobile Press Register if you're not a digital person. And if you are not used to having to go on your laptop here or your iPad and not pick up that paper. I've had the pleasure of working with the people on this panel for years, and I respect them all immensely. I'm honored to get to sit here next to them and get to speak today on this. I'm not going to take long up here because I think that they have, and the people sitting here have much more to offer than I do. But I do want to point out, and Judge Pulliam read some of that complaint there from 2020, and Bennett showed all of these statistics. I'm also glad that everybody got to witness a Bennett Wright presentation so that you can think that you know how to solve something, and then you can walk away and say, wait, I have no idea. Like, I thought that I knew what I was doing, and now I have no idea what I'm doing. So I have felt that way often. I hope everybody had that same frustration there with Bennett. But today I want to talk a little bit about some of these people and introduce you to some of these people that Carla was just describing who have had their second chances. Some of those people are sitting here today. One of them is sitting up here right now. You saw him a little bit in that film. And we also have some family members of people who have died within the custody of the Alabama Department of Corrections. Now, I know Bennett talked a little bit about the ADOC and what is happening there, but I think that it's important to note that we've talked about a lot of the problems in ADOC. Nobody has given us an exact fix for those problems, and Bennett kind of outlined that. Now, we do know that the state is trying to hire more guards. We do know that we have $1 billion prison coming. An official, actually the commissioner with the ADOC, said last year, that's not going to fix our overcrowding problems. And he said that is not something that any of us have to analyze. He said this is not going to help us in terms of overcrowding. And you saw that chart that Bennett also put up, and I just want to note those numbers that he had in the kind of 20,000 range. I don't have the exact number in front of me, and I'm very, very bad at math. But our capacity is around 12,000, or the capacity of the prisons is around 12,000. So whenever you see Bennett's numbers and you see those 20,000 and 21,000, I want you to remember the 12,000 capacity. And I want you to just keep that number in your mind, and you can keep that chart in your mind. And maybe I didn't look closely enough, but I don't think any of those numbers were as low as 12,000 on Bennett's presentation of the people that are inside. And so those are the people we're talking about. And Judge Pulliam also made a point that a lot of these people are people that society is afraid of, and they are in there for a reason. But there are also people, and you will hear from some of them today, that are outliers there and do not belong with those sentences. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to let everybody sitting up here introduce themselves. We will start with Ron McKeithen. I'm not sure if your mic is working. Hopefully it is, and you can introduce yourself there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I believe so.
My name is Ron McKeithen. I served 37 years, and I'm working for Alabama City as a registered partner. It's my responsibility to make sure that these guys get everything they need and live a happy, successful life out there.
My name is Michaela Mount. I'm 17 years old. I think this is important, but I work in a barbecue joint. Not as cool as him. But I am the daughter of Christopher Mount. He was killed in prison in May of 2023. And I'm here to fight for him and others in prison today.
Okay, I don't like these things. Thank y'all for being here, and what's already been talked about, the statistics were really impressive. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. My son Brian died at State Infirmary October 4th of last year. Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Pam Moser. My son died on October 4th of last year at State Infirmary.
Y'all have heard from me, and one thing I want to emphasize is how important it is to listen to the stories of the people impacted. That's what we do at Appleseed. That's how we've learned how to bring about some solutions, who to represent. But people like Pam, Michaela, Ron, they're the storytellers here.
And I'm lucky enough here today and through my career to get to tell some of these stories. And I want to start with Ron McKeithen. I've gotten to tell his story before and gotten to do it several times now, and it is always equally as inspiring. Ron, you spent longer than I've been alive in Alabama prisons. You spent about 37 years there. And you got out, and tell me just, the world was in a very different place when you went in to when you got out. Tell me a little bit about getting out of the prison. Did you feel prepared to come into a world that was so different than when you went in?
I don't think nobody was really prepared. We make all these plans of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, the people want to go see, but once we walk out that gate, it's like, no, there's something wrong here. It's like, this is nothing like I imagined. And so it takes time, but for me, I mean, even the sky looked different on the other side of the fence. You know, the air smelled different, but no, I wasn't prepared. But what helped me, I had a lot of support. I had people that were waiting on me when I stepped out, so it's like whatever fear I might have had, it kind of evaporated because I knew I had support that I really never had the whole while I was in prison. And so if it wasn't for Appleseed, OAA, and just different people that just knew what was going on, knew what I went through, I had a good idea. And really people that saw my potential. It's like if they hadn't realized that I was a good guy, even though what I went through, but it's the support. If it wasn't for the support that I was getting, I don't know, it would have been much harder.
Do you think that you deserved to spend the rest of your life in prison, to die in prison?
I went to church. No, I didn't. I deserved to go to prison. I needed to get some correction because the life I was living, the situation with my family, my mother, and all that, the pressure got to me. And so, like most blacks in prison, in my communities, when they're going through all these certain things, they need to settle. They need something to numb. And when you're around drug addicts or people that smoke weed, or if your mother's an alcoholic, your father's an alcoholic, you're going like, okay, maybe this will help. And then because I didn't have a father, I just got around the wrong crowd. And most of the people I was around, they was going through the same situation. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at this film and I'm seeing how these numbers rise. And my thing is like, why all of a sudden so many people going to prison? Why? Not just about what they did, but why they did it. What did they go through in life? And if you ever go through some of our communities, you see mental health walking around everywhere. You see so many people on drugs, and the people that's trying to go do good, they got to maneuver through all that. And then where they're not able to get certain jobs, where the bank's not even getting the loans in those areas. And I'm talking about red line areas, to where it's systematically being designed so that these people will have to rise and become a Vestavia. You know, their schools will not get the right amount of money to come like the school in Homewood. You know, like our science lab. I remember I was going to school, it's kind of like science, but it was a room, I thought it was a great room to do science, but once I visited a school over there in Homewood, I'm like, but it's like this is a science lab in a college or something. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's so much a difference, and people when you want to talk, when you say that, okay, there's a cause of this, people say that's an excuse. No, that's a reason why. You got to look at the reasons why we get in this situation, where we're going to come to jail in prison. But if we was to attack the things that's going on in the communities, just really attack the reasons that why people are so going through this and that, we can solve. That's at the core. And then you have so many going to prison. But it's like, seems like, okay, we're gonna ignore the community, ignore the schools, and then be surprised when the prison population go up from these communities. And that's what I love about the conversation we're having right now. Because this, I want to point out something else. It's like this is like a curtain, all right? You all out here see prison from this angle. And it may not be so, but for us, we're on this side. And you're not seeing what we see. We find our life every day. But on this end, it's like, and what's so hurting about it, people are constantly dying every day in prison while people out here are trying to figure out what to do. And they know how many are dying. I mean, the people, they know. But it's like, when we look at that, it hurts us because we went through it. I mean, we emotionally go through it. I mean, just for us to even look at that film, it was like hurtful because we had to relive it. But I would just pray that you all would just understand what's going on in these communities across that track. Understand what is not being done, what's deliberately not being done to solve the issues. I'm not talking about deliberately not being done on the other side of the track. And if you just straighten out what's going on from the court, from the schools, you won't have those numbers rising like that.
When you talk about the people that die in ADOC custody, and that brings us to two other people sitting up here today and their loved ones. I want to start, Ms. Moser. Tell me about your son. And Ron also talked about drugs in prison, talked about drugs, rehabilitation in general. Tell me the story of your son. I want to ask you about it, but I think that everybody should hear his story first.
Okay, my son, his name was Brian. He died at Staten Infirmary October 4th of last year. He was smart, he was funny, he loved music, he loved to read, he was loyal to a fault. He helped other inmates get their GED. He was also bipolar, and he was also an addict. And he struggled with addiction, more so toward the last 3 years of his incarceration when it got really bad. But Brian took responsibility for what he did. He never said, I didn't do it. He never felt like the sentence didn't fit the crime. He was paroled in 2017. Before he was out for a year. He never reoffended, but he did have a problem staying away from substances. And his parole was, his parole was revoked for a parole violation. And so he went back. They said it would probably be for a year. He was put off for 2 years, and then he was put off for 5 years, and then he was put off for 5 more years for a parole violation. That's where he ended up with the last institution he was in, and seemed to really go down. But so his story, as far as the ending, he in August of last year, we went to visit him on visitation day. I visited him every visitation. His dad did on most visitation days. When he walked in, he was limping. He hugged us, as he always did. And he sat down, and I said, let me look at this leg. I'm a nurse. I said, let me look at this leg. And he had about a half to an inch open stab wound on his left calf that was obviously infected. His left side of his face was swollen and discolored. His teeth were missing. When I stood up, I noticed he had a cut on his head. I counted 5 lacerations on his head, 5 open lacerations. It is a vision that will always be with me. So I was done. I sat down, and then I went over to the CO that was sitting in the visitation yard, and I said, I'm really concerned about my son. He could have a head injury, and the CO said, Brian tends to provoke people. I had to make him go back to the dorm and change his pants because they had blood all over him. So why he didn't think that was a problem, I don't know. And I said, I really think he needs to see a doctor. And he said, I'll make sure he sees someone after visitation. That didn't happen. So that was a Saturday. It took until Wednesday for me to get the warden, and that's not because I didn't call. I called the ADOC, talked to the ombudsman, I talked to their legal department. They all said that they would investigate, but I couldn't know the outcome. So Wednesday, he saw the prison doctor. They sent him to an outside hospital. He had a skull fracture, facial fracture, rib fractures, teeth knocked out, infected, stab wound. They wanted him to tell them who had done it. And of course he would not, because he didn't want the same thing to happen and finish the job. A few weeks after that, he went back in the hospital, and he was there for over a week. We couldn't find out what was going on with him. He was not allowed to call us. We could not call him. We couldn't get any information until one day the hospital doctor said the family needed to come in because Brian wasn't doing well and he wasn't responding to treatment. And there is so many more details and things that happened during this time that I don't have the time to go into it, but anybody that wants more information, I will be more than glad to share Brian's story. We finally did end up getting to see him in the hospital. The doctor had been in and told him that his prognosis was poor, that he want life support, and he said no, still was not allowed to call his family. He's there handcuffed to a bed, and he can't even call his family. So we got to visit him Sunday, Monday. Tuesday we went to visit him. They talked to him about comfort care or palliative care, and he agreed to that. And I got a phone call Tuesday afternoon. They were stopping our visits at the hospital because Brian was doing better. And I said, how is he doing better? He's on comfort care. And they said, well, yeah, he's doing better. He's comfortable. And I said, no, comfort care means he's dying. And that warden said, we're all dying. That was her response. So it ended up, we did get to see him the next day, and I will say that visit was it was an amazing visit. Me and his dad and his sister got to stay almost 4 hours. It was a very healing visit. I had already filled out the paperwork to get a medical furlough so he could come home and die at home with me. That didn't happen because he went back to state infirmary. We called every day, tell Brian we love him, tell him we're trying to get a visit, tell him we're trying to get him home so he can die at home. We don't know if he got any of those messages. We don't know if he got those messages, if he gave a response to them. And then, a week later, he left the hospital on a Wednesday. The next Wednesday morning, I got a call that said Mr. Rigsby had died at 12:25 the night before. And so I asked if I could talk to someone that was with him when he died. I mean, he should not have died alone. No one should die alone. I mean, there's no reason why his mother and father and sister should not have been there with him. And they said they couldn't do that. That wasn't allowed. And, so he was alone. I don't know if he was comfortable. I don't know if he was having a lot of pain. He was in acute liver failure. He had bacterial peritonitis. And, and this is my thinking as a medical person. I think that his wounds got infected. He got septic. I think that attacked his liver. And I think that's why he went into liver failure. And it was totally preventable. When I did talk to the warden the day that I found out he had been sent to a hospital, the warden said, I don't know how we let Brian get by us. Not, I'm sorry, not, he said he would check and found out there had not been an incident filed. My thinking is, my son was beaten like an animal. And you can't tell me that was a quiet event. And you can't tell me someone did not hear that or see that. Where were the COs during this? I mean, why, just where were they? And during that time, and this is just some of the disturbing things that happened to him. you know, with a head injury, people act different. You know, they're very emotional, don't always speak clearly, but he started having bowel movements on himself, and he couldn't control it. And Brian, can't you go to the infirmary? They won't let me. There's not a reason. You need to control yourself. Now, this is someone that is that sick, and they're telling them that they need to be able to control their bodily actions more. And I believe all of that was from a head wound. You know, my thinking is that, you know, Brian got into drugs, he owed someone in gangs, and gangs did this. And I'm not saying all COs are bad, but I think there are those that know what goes on, and for whatever reason, they don't address it. And the only other thing that I do want to mention, only because it was brought up earlier, was about when people get out of prison. When my son got out in 2017, he went to a halfway house and was promised that, you know, they would help him get a job. And this particular place took like 60 or 70 new parolees in one day. And their idea of getting them a job was there was a bus that maybe held 10 or 12 people, and whoever got on that bus first, they took them to one of these pay-by-the-day jobs, and that was their way of getting them a job. I'm not saying that all places are like that. I'm just saying that was Brian's experience, and you know, something's got to change. And I just so appreciate all of you being willing to listen to this. It's a hard story for me to tell, and I'm sure it's a hard story to hear, but it's my son's story. It's Brian's story. And you know, his loss and not being able to be with him when he took his last breath is, you know, it is heartbreaking.
I don't think there's anything that anybody can say really to follow it up, but thank you for sharing his story, Ms. Moser. I think that it's important too, and I want to talk to Michaela and hear about your dad, but one thing I want to mention before we get there is that we talked a minute ago, or I talked a minute ago, about something the state has been trying to do, which is hire more guards and again build this prison, which we talked about a minute ago, wouldn't add the capacity that we need. But I want to note that in 2019, the Department of Justice actually wrote a letter, and it is filed in one of those lawsuits, and they said, and I'm looking here to get those words right, that there are contributing factors to the overall constitutional condition that are not just guards. And they listed a plethora of things. I wrote down just a few this morning, and they said culture, corruption, policies, training, and drugs. And those are just a few things of about a paragraph long, a very small font in a court filing. So again, we talk about facilities, we talk about guards, but several of those things, even if they are being addressed, the DOJ says is not enough. And some of those things I think are evident in both Brian's story and your dad's story. Michaela, tell me a little bit about your dad and about his experience, what happened to him in the Department of Corrections.
So my dad, I apologize for my voice. I had a tonsil left in me 9 days ago, so just kind of bear with me.
Speak up, please.
Sorry. My dad was placed in a suicide unit with another man. My dad was sentenced 30 years for, I want to say, 3 burglaries, 2 robberies, and then 1 violent charge, and he got 30 years. And I'm not going to say his name, but the guy that killed him got 25 years for capital murder. They were placed together on a Thursday, which, if you didn't know, you can't put you can't put 2 inmates in a suicide cell unit together. If you're not supposed to kill yourself, you can't kill somebody else. So they were put together on a Thursday. The guy went up to the COs and said, "Hey, y'all better get Mount out of here before I kill him." And they just kind of laughed it off. They're like, whatever. That Sunday, May 14th, which was Mother's Day, my dad was snoring, as my whole family does. But my dad was was snoring, and the guy was like, "Hey, shut up." And my dad was sleeping, so he just said, "We're in church, so I'm gonna say F you." And he went back to sleep. The guy came up while he was sleeping when the CO had walked off. Mind you, there's supposed to be a CO watching this specific cell. Since there is 2 men in it, there was supposed to be one watching it 24 hours out of the day. The guy came up and stomped on my dad's head a few times. He was able to get up. He stood his own for probably around 4 minutes. The way that he got my dad was a pretty strong dude. He was a big dude. The way that he finally got him down was he ripped my dad's eyeball out of his head. He got him down. He was unconscious, and he ended up strangling him to death. While this whole thing was going on, there was no COs in sight. A CO actually walked by in the middle of the fight and just watched and laughed. And then another one walked by 13 minutes, probably around 12 minutes later, and just thought it was another overdose, and was like, "Let's get the medical team in here." It took them 13 minutes to get back to my dad. He was pronounced dead at, I believe, 11:07 a.m. We were not told for 2 days. We found out on Tuesday. And so that following Friday, we went down to Montgomery to the Department of Corrections, and we spoke to a detective that was obviously through the ADOC. We figured out that the crime scene had been cleaned up before they could do anything, look at it or anything. And we would also ask questions, but we would get no answer. The only answer that we would really get a specific answer to was he sexually assaulted, which thank God it wasn't. But, we would ask questions being like, well, did this happen? Did this happen? And if the question was like point A, the detective would go point, G or F, but he would never get back to A. So we were given really no answers. So that's kind of when I took matters in my own hands. I found a group on Facebook of other families that, have experienced things like I did, and I made a post because I was just confused. I was like, is this true? Is this right? Like, is this not right? What's going on? And I ended up having a guy who was in Easterling Correctional with my dad on the same dorm. And Easterling, from what I've never been there, like back there, obviously, but from what I've heard, it's a dorm, and the very 2 cells at the end are the suicide units. So there was an inmate, I don't like using that word, but I don't want to keep saying the guy. He ended up texting me, and he was in the same dorm, and he saw and heard everything that happened. I found a lawyer. I got my lawyer to go in and get a written statement from him. I still talk to him to this day. He's like a brother to me. But we didn't get any answers. I was never able to collect his property. Me and my mom called probably, I want to say 27 times in just the month of May, just to try and collect his property, his glasses. I mean, he had clothes. Like, we didn't want anything crazy. We just wanted his belongings, and we were never given those. And it's just, he never got out. He will never be able to get out. My dad, he went to prison in October of 2006. I was born in 2006. He went in October, and the first 12 years of his sentence, he was in the honorary dorms. He was doing everything perfect. He was in church. He was doing what he's supposed to do in prison, which is reform and correct. And he went up for parole, was denied, and then his mother died, and everything kind of went downhill, and he lost all of his hope. Fell into drugs, probably did some things that I'm not proud of, he's not proud of, but I do know that right before he died, he joined the Highlands program through the church, and he went and he bawled like a baby to God and just asked for forgiveness for everything he's done. But I know that there just needs to be some type of change. $1 billion prison isn't going to do anything. It's just going to be basically a depopulation because everybody's just going to kill each other. There were 325 deaths last year, just last year, in ADOC. It's just going to be a killing ground. There has to be other issues with, paraphernalia, corrupt cops, drugs, how the COs treat the inmates. I think there just needs to be a lot bigger change than just a prison and, what they're trying to do with all this money and giving the COs more money. It's not going to do anything. In my opinion, I think there needs to be a lot more done than just that.
I just think it's important to note that I've seen grown men that are flinching at this story, and Michaela is 17 and has said this with such elegance. So I think that that's incredible, and congratulations to you for being able to do your dad this justice and tell this story. Because like I said, I'm seeing grown men here, and even some people who, again, were behind bars for all of these years, and just the look on your faces when she tells this story, again, so eloquently at 17. I don't know that many of us could do that.
Thank you.
Carla, we've been sitting up here, we've been talking about these horrific stories. We've already learned about the data, we've learned about the history. What do we do now? And I know that's a loaded question for you, but what can we do now, and what can people, like the people here, people who are interested in trying to help people like the family members of Ms. Moser, of Michaela, Ron, all these gentlemen here, what can people do to help?
I thought I knew, but I don't. For many years we've been telling folks, you got to contact your legislator, support this bill, support that bill. That's not working. Right. Things are just getting worse, as many people have pointed out. What I have learned is we talk about punishment and accountability for individuals like Ron, who grew up in desperately poor situations. They have to be punished. There has to be accountability. So we do that. But there has been not 1 ounce of accountability for the state of Alabama in the way it has overseen a system that is unconstitutional, that is criminal, that is deadly. So the question is, how do we create accountability? Because right now, the people who are fighting reform, who are refusing to pass our second chance bill, who are dominating parole conversations, who are funding this $1 billion prison, they are winning elections off that position. What I'm told, and I've had some really frank conversations with people in the legislature who have positions of authority, and they will lift up a case of someone who maybe let out early, the parole case, Jimmy Spencer, who was paroled, and unfortunately, because of all the things that have been talked about that we do, the huge menu we have in corrections for options, one thing that's not on that menu is reentry help for when people leave these traumatizing, violent prisons. There is none. And so people are released all the time. Some are released on parole, very few, but it is almost inevitable that somebody is going to fall into a mental health crisis or drug issues or homelessness when they're released, and they might commit another crime. So we have made policies based on this sample size of 1, Jimmy O'Neill Spencer, and we have ended parole essentially because of making decisions based on a sample size of 1, and people have gained extraordinary political power because of that. So that is not hopeful at all, and I know I was supposed to give some more hopeful solutions, but what we have tried to do is work individually, one-on-one, and identify those people who, despite these horrific conditions described by Ms. Moser and by Michaela, have decided, I'm not going to be part of the drugs and the corruption and the violence. I'm going to make a decision every day to stay in this honor dorm, to go to class, to not get in a fight when somebody provokes me. And it is so, so hard, especially when you're given a sentence of life or life without parole. And right now, those life sentences are basically life without parole. And we're talking about around 5,000 people who, under current conditions, will never get out of these prisons. So we have tried to identify people one by one and Shawshank them out of there through agreements with district attorneys. And I think as voters in Alabama, we can't do enough to send the message to whoever will listen to you, whether it is your district attorney or your legislator or a judge. You want a system with fewer people. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. People have to get out of prison and have reentry services. That 20,000 number has to be reduced. We as voters, we as people of faith, we as people who are paying attention to what our elected officials are doing, want fewer people in our prisons. How that can happen, there's lots of different ways. We are really fortunate because here in Jefferson County, we have District Attorney Danny Carr, who believes in second chances, who has agreed with releases in our cases, who has supported these alternative courts and diversion programs, and also Lenise Washington and Bessemer. She actually started the work that we're doing with our second chance clients by supporting release of our very first client. They need our support, they need encouragement, because if every district attorney was like the ones we have in Jefferson County, we would not have the problems that we have today. But it hasn't always been this way. So unless we are willing to revisit these outdated old sentences and correct the mistakes of the past, I don't believe we'll ever fix this problem. And that wasn't really solution oriented.
Absolutely, and if anybody's got questions, please raise your hand. I'm loud enough, I can pass the mic, and we'll get to them. But while everybody's playing musical chairs here, I want to thank, again, Ms. Moser, thank Michaela for the courage in telling their stories. And yes, and we talk about, Carla and Bennett had both mentioned parole, and I've done a lot of reporting on the parole board here, and we talk a lot, or I talk a lot, again, about the 8% of people that were granted parole last year, and I just want to make it clear that was not 8% of people that are in the Department of Corrections. That is not 8% of people who were eligible for parole. That was 8% of people who were eligible for parole and had a hearing last year. So just again, sometimes we look at these statistics and they can get a little bit confusing if you just look at them all over, but that's a small amount. Numbers aren't out for how things are going this year. There's numbers for the month of January, but it's hard to get a sample size on what's happening this year. But that was 2023 from the parole board. It was 8% of people eligible that had a hearing that were granted. Does anybody have questions here? I believe Dr. Alexander does.
I have a question about the parole board. How long are they there? Is it a lifetime appointment? And I agree with Mr. Bennett about there's no parole school to get there, but what is their tenure? Are they lifetime?
No, they're not lifetime. Would you like to answer that, Bennett?
Sure. They have terms of 6 years.
6 years?
6 years, and then they can be re-elected.
And they alternate so that somebody comes off and comes on?
But they are appointed, correct.
That's correct.
They're appointed, and then there's a confirmation process, which the 2019 law changed.
Yes.
So there's actually a vetting body. That vetting body is required to give a certain number of names to the governor. The governor then appoints, and then the Senate Confirmation Committee actually has the ability to reject or accept.
Also, in 2019, the verdict was changed to the point where it can be vetoed by the Attorney General or the governor. No matter what the three-panel board says, they can override it and deny the parole. So it has become political now, beyond what it has ever been.
I'll make a quick note too that and Bennett had explained this, that there's a board of 3 people that makes that nomination list, hands it to the governor, and then the governor appoints. But the person who's appointed does not have to be confirmed by the Senate there. If the session can pass and they don't call for confirmation hearings, then they're confirmed. So those hearings don't have to happen. Legislators don't have to listen into it. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for your powerful stories and also for the information that you shared. I just have one question as somebody who has represented somebody before the parole board. And then you brought this up about the time being served and figuring out how much of the work that they do in the prisons, like going to classes and all of that, how that will factor into their sentencing or going up with parole being released. Is there any talks about even allowing those that are up for parole to even appear on their own behalf before the parole board? Because when I was there, it may have changed since I was there with my client, but before, if you are up for parole, even as the person that is the parolee, you are not allowed to speak on your own behalf or talk about what you've done in prison to, reform or recidivism. So I just have a question about that.
So that is actually something the parole board is doing. They're allowing pre-recorded videos to be presented. So a person who is in prison cannot come to their hearing, and they explored options for live streaming a statement. The Bureau decided that was not something they could pursue based on technology, based on, I'm assuming, prison conditions as well, and based on the issues with victims that were also in the rooms along with the live stream. So what they have done is they can submit a pre-recorded video, and I can let Judge or Carla speak to this, but that often is only helpful for somebody who has an attorney, because if you don't have an attorney, who's going to get that pre-recorded video for you, and who's going to show it to the board? So if you don't have an attorney, you don't really get that opportunity. And I'll see if Carla wants to add anything to that.
I think you kind of made the point, but people who are given the opportunity to speak, they don't have any idea what the parole board is looking for. They may be, dealing with all kinds of traumatizing conditions in the prison, and they're trying to make this pitch for their freedom, and they have 2 or 3 minutes to do it, and nobody's advising them on what to say or how to say it, because even though decisions of how long your sentence is going to be, if you're going to be released, are made at the parole board, are critically important. You don't have a right to a lawyer, and so we have mixed feelings about whether people should. Yes, if people want to, they should speak. But in some cases, what they say could actually hurt their chances because they're never given any guidance as to what the parole board looks for.
And Tom, I think you.
Ben, and all of you can answer this. I thought when the reforms had passed earlier that there was, as they're built into the sentencing system, a threat assessment tool that was supposed to be developed that was supposed to be followed by the parole board, or?
Sure. So,
yes.
So the 2015 piece of legislation. Oh, sorry. So the 2015 piece of legislation requires the parole board to do an assessment for parole, but they are free to depart from it. So all that's required is the assessment is conducted. The parole board has to look at it. It's much like the old voluntary sentencing guidelines. So they're required to look at it. They are not required to follow it.
Tom, the problem is further than that, or it goes back from that. We sat in the Judiciary Committee with Cam Ward at the head, and we discussed for a long time with the parole board chair there that the legislation was dependent upon the parole board coming up with criteria to give to the parolee, this is why you were denied, and if you do X, Y, and Z, then the next time around, you would be considered, favorably for parole. That has never been done. Of course, we've had several different parole board directors since then, but a lot of the bill that was passed in the legislature had a huge parole board component to it, and the parole board never complied with, and they're not complying to the day.
And we keep bringing up the Jimmy Spencer, no relation. Case, which is angling here. understand from the case, he never should have been out in the first place. I mean, like, if he was fed into a real threat assessment, he would not have been paroled. And when he gets out, the parole that's supposed to be happening doesn't happen. So there's no, there were like 17 flaws in the system, which speaks back to your earlier point of like, oh, we've changed the law to parole more people, but you don't do the back end of watching the people on parole or assessing who's a real threat. And then what do you expect? So.
I know we have ma'am in the back, a question. That would be you.
Is there a process of removal for someone on the parole board who is not very effective? And is there an appeals process available to someone who has been denied parole for this ineffectiveness, perhaps?
There's not an appeal process there. I'll toss that first question to Bennett.
There's, the law allows the only legal mechanism to remove a parole board member is for impeachment. So there's an impeachment proceeding, but you have to provide you can't say it's related to the job duty. It would have to be something almost criminal in nature to justify impeachment.
I will point out that in 2019-20, I wrote a letter to Governor Ivey on behalf of the Alabama Circuit Judges Association, pointing out to her that judges cannot continue to send people to prison if no one is getting out. It is undoing all of our good work that we have done up to this point, and that's what has happened. No one is getting paroled, including people who have been in there 30 years who are on dialysis. You know, there is no reason whatsoever that the state of Alabama should be paying, and I don't mean to put this just in a dollar sense meaning, but we should not have a dialysis wing in a prison filled to capacity. If these people have other places they can go, they're trying to get out, there should be the furlough mechanism to get them out, as well as the ability for the board, for that board to work. I forgot what year it was, but I think it was 2005, 6. Governor Riley instituted 3 parole boards. 3, I think it was, Bennett? 2 parole boards. He comprised additional parole boards to take care of the problem. That's something that could be done now.
There's something I want to note. I know we have more questions here, but on the on parole, I've been investigating this for over a year now, and I thought that, okay, well, it won't take that long to do this series. And then it just, another couple of months went by. I'm almost finished. It won't take much longer. And that was over a year ago. So this is a long conversation, the history there, the factors there, and these people have done a great job at condensing this, but this is something that is so complex. And again, just when you think you have it figured out, there's a stepping stone there. So I would encourage everybody, I know we talk sometimes about what we can do, and I gave Carla that awful question as to how we fix things, but everybody that showed up here today, I would say that if you're interested in this, don't take our word for how these things work, or don't take my articles for how parole works. Go to the parole board hearings. They're open. You can go and sit in on them, and you can listen to these in Montgomery. They happen every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Drive down, go in. You don't have to take our word for everything here. You can go and sit, and you can be an informed citizen there. Ma'am, I think that you had your hand up first.
Yes, clear up this for me. How many parole boards are there?
There's one.
One.
Yes, ma'am.
They of 3 people.
Yes, ma'am.
For the entire state.
Yes, ma'am.
They are politically appointed.
Yes, ma'am.
Are they paid?
Yes, ma'am.
All of these things happen, and so 3 people control all of these lives.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
They make $144,000 a year.
They make what?
Isn't that right, Bennett?
44,000. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay.
He's avoiding that one.
That's what I was told when they tried to recruit me.
Those are also, though, again, informed citizens, you can look up those salaries online. Open Alabama, you can type in a board member's name, you can search it and you can see how much they are paid. These are things that they are public record, they're hard to find, but they can be done.
You mentioned that there were multiple parole boards in the past. What happened?
I will give that one either to Bennett here. I think he's our historian on that.
Sure. In 2003, the Alabama legislature passed a law that authorized multiple parole boards, but it had a sunset provision where the multiple boards went away in 3 years. And so after beginning in 2005, it went back to a one board, a 3-member panel since.
We have a question, I think, in the back was the next one. I'm trying to go in order here, guys. I'm sorry.
So is there any data, because I heard you say there's 5,000 people on life sentences, around how many of those life sentences were for crimes of poverty and for crimes associated with substance abuse addiction, that they're on life sentences?
Carlo, do you want to take that?
That's not an exact data point we have. I can tell you it's easier to get a life sentence in Alabama for a non-homicide crime or even a non-violent crime than in most other states. In terms of like the drug component, I will tell you the Department of Justice determined that somewhere between, I think, 70 and 80% of the people currently incarcerated in our prisons are using drugs. So that's the best drug-related data point I have.
Just to follow up, because the question, the thought process, during the crack era, we know a lot of people were getting felonies for crimes associated with their substance abuse. And so it's kind of easy under the 3-strike law to get 3 felonies if you stole something that was over $300, if you do that 2 or 3 times because you're in the throes of addiction, now you're in life in prison because of your substance abuse.
No, you're exactly right. I actually looked at Bennett's report, and there have been some good reforms around sending people to prison. Actually not sending people to prison, but putting people on community corrections or probation just for minor drug crimes. But right now, I believe there are 33 to 34,000 people with drug felonies who've gotten out of prison over the last 5 years, or have gotten out of like community corrections or probation. But it's almost 35,000 people with a nonviolent drug felony on their record, and that interferes with housing, education, and job opportunities. So the way we continue to criminalize low-level drug cases instead of treating them as misdemeanors is creating, I think, some of the problems that you're talking about.
I'm going to do one more question, and then I think we're all going to hang around for a little bit after, so you feel free to grab us and ask any of that. I need one more here. Let's see. Whoever's the loudest gets it. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
What is the status of the federal case against the state of Alabama in terms of prison reform? Where are we right now?
In court.
In court.
How long did it take the last one? 14 years?
Yes, the last piece of litigation lasted 14 years. This current one's, I think the first one was filed 6 to 7 years ago.
We were slated to go to trial in the fall, in November. I believe that has been moved back at this point. But that was the first, I think, actual trial date they had set, but I don't think that's set for November anymore. So now we're again in this litigation waiting period.
I knew this was going to be a disaster as far as timing goes, because I've said that this was going to run from 9 to 11 to con people into coming and thinking, oh, it's just 2 hours. And I knew we would go over and want to continue going over. But we do want to respect people's time, and my wife is gesturing at me.
Ron mentioned, on a personal note, Ron said something about what can we do before to prevent all these people from going to prison. And I wish we could hear a little bit more on that. I mean, I know, we worked with the children at KA for a long time here at IPC, and we have a summer learning program, and so do those things matter in your eyes?
one thing I know that's not giving them hope is all of these laws that are being brought about and passed that's not being retroactive, that puts their hopes up. And that results in, because we talk about violence in there, and I mean, why all the violence? You know, you should ask yourself, why all the violence? One, they're not giving hope. There's not really no serious rehabilitation going on. And if you got one, you got a lot of what you call outpatients, mental health in there, because it's like busted with mental health individuals. And if a lion was to walk up to you right now, our instinct is to protect ourselves. You're just going to sit there and let the lion start chewing on you. And in prison, if you see somebody with a knife, or two people, or somebody jumping somebody, oh, wait a minute, this might happen to me. And so people are put in a position where they got to either let somebody beat them to death or kill them, or you're going to protect yourself. And if those three here want to protect ourselves from them five, then you're going to see 7, 8 people fighting. But it's a reason for this. And the reason because of the way the conditions of the prison became, that you got to either become prey or, and people, I mean, it's like a lot of people come to prison, they don't like pain. But you're going to get familiar with it, you're going to receive it, you're going to already get it if you want to live. And me, I wanted to live because I had people outside I want to get to, you know. But other people too, and this is another thing I want to find about hope. For I don't know how long now, they've been denying practically everybody parole and putting them off 5 years. Not 6 months, not a year, but 5 years. I know an individual, I got to say his name, I love the guy, Jimmy Click. Some of y'all may have met him in St. Clair. But he's done 37 or more now, but 37 years, went for parole, life sentence, not one disciplinary, worked in the chapel for 95% of the sentence, and got denied. Now you think when you're doing everything in prison you can possibly do to get out and do everything right, and then they're going to put you off, say 5 years? How can they do another 5 years? I damn near got killed 3, 4 times last week, you know? And so what is this person going to do? Okay, do another 5 years, or just give up hope, put that dope in his arms, you know, just because it's hard enough. I do know, I'm hearing everything that's going on about we're trying to do on the outside. But I'm going to keep telling you, people are dying in that prison every day. Homicide, check out the homicide rate in there. I mean, just check that out, that rate. Don't just check out suicide rate. That's the one I want you to check out, the suicide rate. People are, I thought about killing myself because I couldn't deal with it no more. It's more going on in that prison than you can settle with now because people are dying. And you don't really know about it. And that's the problem. You don't know, they don't want you to know. They keep it on the low. But if you really knew what was going on in there, we know, we experienced it. It hurts us to even hear this, to just see you talk when the statistics up, we're like, man, that's what y'all did to me. That's how y'all was making sure. That hurts us. It makes us angry. And those guys right there, they're willing to get up at any time and share their story, talk to people, help. They're giving back. Even the guy right here in the wheelchair, he's giving back. And that's what we do. But there's so many of the guys in prison just like us if you just give them a chance. But what they're doing is when you're in prison, like everybody that needs to get out of prison and got out, I mean, to keep everybody else. If it weren't for Carla, we'll still be in there. And if you check out these guys been doing, you'll say the same thing. He ain't even been in that prison. 37 years for me. Hurt nobody. Doing every great thing I can in prison. I did 37 years. Got here, did 40 years. Hadn't hurt nobody. That don't make sense. But it seems like people above us in Montgomery, they don't care. It's political. It's money. You can't see it the way we see it because we live through it. If you could just look through our eyes just for a minute, go in that prison and really see what's going on. Don't listen to what people telling you. Go in there and witness it for yourself. You'll say, we got to do something about this. That's all I want you to do. Just really realize what's going on and don't forget about the lives. While we're struggling out here trying to make changes, people are dying every day in there.
And it's being done in your name.
In your name.
That is the state of Alabama, right?
And I feel like I've got to say something about what Carla said, because we all want to say, what can we do? Okay? What can we do? Carla's having trouble for hope, but I want to suggest something. What we need, Carla mentioned this, and Ms. Moyer mentioned this, is high-quality re-entry programs, so that when people get out, they can stay out. Okay? And I'm going to leave you a house, and we run these kinds of programs. But here's what this group can do today. If we can get everybody's email address, contact info, can we go to our elected officials and ask them to fund a pilot project in Jefferson County that will provide high-quality re-entry service? And this is something, you know, because what'll happen is if I go and Carla goes, they're gonna say, yeah, you just wanna do it because it's for you. But if this group went to the county commission or the Alabama legislature and said, would you please fund a pilot reentry program in Jefferson County? That's something that we can leave here doing that we didn't do at 9 o'clock. And so I would ask if anybody's led to do that, if we can get a list of people who are interested in supporting that, come together and see if we can get those resources started.
All right, so my email address is tspencer, this is my private email, at planetbama.com. So planetbama.com. And if you'll just send me an email, we have an email list. If you're interested in being on an email list from the previous occasion, I can add you to that email list, and we can stay in touch. There is Books for Prison volunteer back there if you want to talk to them. Another way of getting involved. Are there other organizations here who would like to say, well, there's Faith in Action, there's Greater Birmingham Ministries. Raise your hand if you want, it would entertain other.
May I say one word to leave some hope here?
Yes, hold on 1 second. I would be in trouble with my wife if I don't say one word for hope. Right, and I'm gonna add that what Ivy was trying to point out is IPC itself has a program, that summer learning program that works with kids in Hayes, so we can maybe reach those kids in the inner city who are subjected to terrible conditions and are in the face of violence and are not getting the education that they need. Maybe we can help. So go see her to volunteer this summer for the Children's Learning Program. I'm on the board of STARE, which is Start the Adventures in Learning. You can volunteer at a Birmingham school. We need volunteers to help kids with literacy. If kids aren't reading on grade level by the end of 4th grade, they're basically doomed. They're really doomed to failure, academic failure, and oftentimes that ends up leading to incarceration and so forth. Now,
I am listening, and I have a hard time being quiet. So y'all excuse me, but I'm Bill Franks. I have a nonprofit called Hope for Tomorrow. And it started because I've helped a lot of men get out of prison. I've done programs in prison, and I've spent a lot of time with men like your husband, your son, your daddy. And I will tell you right now, inside this system, there is no hope. The men that I spent talking to Thursday, and that's when Mr. Click's name was brought up because we were discussing, do I have a chance? I helped a man put together a parole plan with 30 pages of certificates, 28 years of no disciplinaries. And he looks at me and he said, does it even matter any longer that we do all this? Do they even pay attention to it? He's 5 years out from a hearing, supposedly, but on the calendar it's been 7 years because the system has not put the file on like this yet. So, there is hope. As I looked at your statistics, there were ups and downs. If we were a business and financially going back looking at our spreadsheets, our board would come back and say, you made money when it was up, you didn't when it was down. Actually, we're looking at the other thing. We were doing something right when it went down, and we were doing something wrong when it went up. Every one of those peaks, valleys, were because there was a mindset being used with our corrections department and our parole department that has constantly questioned correction versus rehabilitation. And when the mindset is focused on rehabilitation, people have got out. The hope is there are men like this out. There are another 100 for every one of them at least. It's like Schindler's List, the last scene. How many more can we help? Don't ever think the job is finished. Let's help more, and let's pay attention to what you're hearing here, because the mindset in Montgomery affects these men, their lives, and the lives of their families. It can be done. It has been done. We've seen it work. Let's don't quit because it's not working well right now.
Amen, brother.
Sure.
Ivy.
Oh, forgive me, I didn't ask you a question.
I didn't ask you a question. I thought about it. UAB, Auburn, used to come in and teach these classes. UAB would come in twice a month for about 11 months a year. Auburn would come in and bring classes. Sometimes they do one class, sometimes they do 3, from arts to writing. And also, at one time, people come in and would teach us Labash, which is, would teach us Labash where we can like teach people how to read that's at a very low level. None of that is going on now. And why? Well, first, COVID. And when after COVID, they just didn't bring it back because they said for lack of security. We tried to keep it going through UAB by bringing packaging and material to pass out. But it got to the point, well, but the educational system that was coming in the classes, I can speak for a lot of guys. Education is fundamental. And I really learned that because to be in a classroom with other people that like mine and having an instructor facilitate that really just treats you like a human, it was fun. For a lot of us, the classroom became our sanctuary. Right. To the point where we would go to our dorm and start these classes, create classes. But that's not going on now. The only class you might really have in now is like what guys are doing in the dorms. You have like the GED department, you have the trade. But at one time, it was just the inmates teaching the trade. And it was life without parole, but then they got to the point they didn't want even life without parole teaching trades. But they're just not allowing life without to, take back trades. But now, guys with life without parole who felt they're never gonna get out of prison, rushed to take them trade because certain things they're hearing is giving them hope. But they're doing it.
I was part of a program, had the joy of being part of the program that we brought into the Bid Prison that paired University of Alabama business honors students with mentoring men in white on every Friday afternoon about business plans, business skills, and life training. The joy of that was seeing not only the men in white and now in tan eyes open up and be with a human being, but to see those young men from universities be exposed to a different group of men with whom they would probably never be in contact in any other event. So the idea is we were planting seeds in our younger adults for the future to have a more compassionate view of the world. There's multiple benefits of exactly what you say, so we need to keep going with that.
Okay, one last question.
Are there currently Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and so on classes in prisons?
Yes, but most of them being taught by inmates.
Most of them.
Are being taught about inmates.
If you looked at the therapeutic stuff, to a certain extent, they talked about the reforms that were put in 15, 16. We had a large number of people who were beginning to get reentry and all this kind of stuff. And COVID and the declining number of correction officers and the rising levels of violence has caused them to cancel most of it. So a lot of those services that were in place, it's just a doom loop because the security is so bad that they don't feel like they can let people in. So that's been seriously curtailed. So lawyers have to Zoom. can't meet directly with their clients. Faith in Action is over there. They do work trying to reform the criminal justice system. If you want to meet with them, Greater Birmingham Ministry, Scott slipped out. No, there's Scott Douglas. Interfaith Social Justice Mission.
Kairos.
Oh yeah, great. Kairos, who goes into the prisons. I have friends who are involved in that. They will testify in how incredibly powerful that is as an experience. If you want to get involved there, my wife will tell you about summer learning at Children's Fresh Air Farm. Chris Rattan there with Alethea House has one of the premier addiction recovery nonprofits in Jefferson County. Foster, you need to send us out with a message. You've been raising your hand and wanting to say something.
Yeah, I do have something.
And you're a legend, so we've got to have Foster. Foster gets the last word.
I want to know where every one of these legislators that has impact on this go to church.
Yes.
Okay? Yes. They can't run for the legislature if they're not associated with a faith community or able to at least say that I'm a conservative Christian. Okay? I want to know, where is the faith community aggregated in any way to come together to influence the legislature by way of their membership in faith communities? Is there any organization that's pulling together the faith community and pastors who speak for us, who would go and make a moral case for correcting the situation that we're in? Because this is a moral case more than as much as anything else. And I don't know, Carla, is there anything out there like that?
Not locally, but nationally there are Christian groups, including the Christian Coalition, that have supported our efforts. The church is not as powerful in Alabama as the law enforcement infrastructure.
Just quick.
Okay, Ralph.
But Carla had House Bill 29 trying to get it passed this year.
Right.
I came down to the legislature when they were hearing it in committee, because when Carla says show up, I jump out. And all the people that were in the hall were from the District Attorneys Association, et cetera, et cetera. There was no one from the faith community. And so you can talk to your legislature on the phone, show up when he's getting ready to have a vote and say, my church of 300 people wants to know what your good vote is. That's all I have. Thank you.
Y'all read Ivana's piece about the most recent parole hearing. Her series is called Denied, is that right? And it talks about a 2.5-hour parole hearing for an individual who's 85 and has served many years, and the victim's mother sent a video in saying she forgave the inmate, and the parole board chair did not believe the video to be coerced, didn't think that anybody could forgive someone after how many years? After 32 years of an accidental shooting. It's a fascinating read, and it tells you something, when you're talking about Christianity and the idea of forgiveness. I'm not sure you see a lot of that. So maybe more church members at the parole board hearings too. So, all right, keep networking, keep talking. Thank you for coming, and let's